Hello and welcome to Tienery. My name is Luke, of course, and I am going to be recording in a different way. What I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is I'm going to be doing a voiceover over some pre-recorded video, primarily because I think it's just better that way. It allows me to concentrate while I'm working on the project in the background, and then just commenting on the things that I'm currently doing in the background as I'm pretty much just watching this video. So what I'm doing here, as you can see, is I'm actually making all of these individual elements position absolute. Now the reason why I want to do that is because I want to be able to fade out all of these images and move them to the left and right respectively. But I can only really do that by assigning each of them different values and positioning them in a specific way. So as you can see, I'm positioning the library 50% of the way across the screen in order for our elements, our individual columns to be specified in a specific place. I will explain later why. Because when we click on these things, what we want to do is we want to be able to animate all four of them out as we're going between the screens. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code. Adjust it a bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make some adjustments to the using jQuery to make sure that everything is set up correctly. So I'm going to be taking a look at the individual columns. So what I'm doing here right now is I'm actually getting the height of the news. I shouldn't really be using inner height, I should use height, which I will eventually do. And what I will then use that, I will be using that later on to position the timeline and the shop in their respective positions. So initially what I was thinking of doing was doing it this way, and then I thought to myself, actually there's a specific functionality that you can use in Haxe where if you use single quotes you can actually use the $sign to get the variable using from Haxe code, right, as you can see. But I realized there's a problem with this because the escape mechanism, which is the backslash, doesn't actually work in this context, so I ended up having to revert back eventually to make sure that it works properly. Ended up using height here because obviously that was technically the so as you can see here, I'm reverting back to the original plan, which was use double quotes and just plus it against, and copy and paste for the above to make it work properly. So I refresh it, and as you can see, it's all working properly now. So that's all good. So now I can move on to actually taking a look at how I'd like to animate it. Originally what my initial plan was to animate it using transforms. I did test that in a previous recording, but I'm not going to actually put that on YouTube because it's just me ranting and trying to figure out why it ain't working. I don't think it's really YouTube worthy. It's not very good quality. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of all of this, and I'm going to specify each individual element, so news, library, timeline and shop respectively, and I'm going to animate them in a specific way. So that fades out correctly, which is all good, but obviously as you can see we're having problems with the news page because we don't actually have a news page yet. So we'll go ahead and test that in a moment, but that's all good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to comment out the script because I don't want to adjust I don't want to load pages at the moment. I want to refresh the page and be able to live preview exactly what I want displayed so that I can test the kind of appearance that I want for the news page. So I refresh it, now there's nothing there, so now I'm going to test what I'd like excuse me, to see for the news page. So this news page is going to have, or rather shall I say, all other pages are going to have a panel which is going to have a width of 90%, not 80%, and we're going to center it in the middle. I do find that there was an issue with regards to the content wrapper, so I do eventually go back up and scroll up to that to make it a width of 100%, because inline block, as you may have discovered, automatically assigns a width depending on the content, so just be aware of that. If you set something to inline block, just make sure that you set the width if you need to. So down here I'm testing some animation. So this was my initial call. I wanted to do CSS3, but eventually I resorted to using JavaScript, well, Haxe again, because for some reason using purely CSS to do click functionality is not necessarily a good thing. It doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. So it was just a case of, okay, well, I've got this animation that I want applied to the panel, but it ain't working as expected. It will appear immediately, and then it will do its animation, which isn't the result that I want. I want it to fade in as it's being loaded. Or once it's loaded, should I say. So as you can see here, I'm testing the CSS out for panel complete, and I applied both of these classes to this div element within the news page. Well, what will eventually become the news page, should I say. So the panel complete, as I've mentioned with animations before, what you need to do is you need to set up the initial values that you want the panel to be. Then if you are to apply a panel to the class, or rather the class to the div element, eventually got there in the end, then you would have two classes there instead of just the one. As you can see, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Why is this happening? So essentially I'm trying to work out exactly what's going on. So I go back here, it is animating, as you can see, but it's not quite 100%. No pun intended. Because obviously we will be going back up to the content ID to set the width to 100% to make sure it is properly centered in the way that we would expect it to. So here I'm just testing to see if the opacity is actually working properly, which it does in fact look like it's doing, so that's fine. So I'm going back up to the content. I set the width to 100% just to make sure that it's 90% across the screen and not 90% in that form. I also realised that the page is too close to the logo, so I do adjust the margin top. So I get rid of the border. That was just to help aid in what it looked like. So I go back to the page, it's animating in, that's nice, which is nice. What we don't want, obviously, is for it to appear, animate, and then stay there, right? Because what we saw was the header would appear immediately, and then it would animate, which is not the result that I'm looking for. So I put it into its individual news page, I save, I click on that, but it's not doing anything. And the reason why that is because I made an error in the links, in the anchor links in the news page. So I go back to the news page and adjust the ref links. Accidentally opened one to share for some reason. And it taking forever to close because, you know, software developers. Every programmer doesn't necessarily know what they're doing, they like to think they do. Then again, this industry is plagued with object-oriented programming, so I'm not going to go into an object-oriented programming debate. There's plenty of videos of people debating object-oriented programming and why procedural is the way to go. All I'm going to say on the subject is that in procedural programming you can share code a lot easier. It's a lot easier to share code in procedural code than it is in functional object-oriented programming, because you have to move variables about and it gets very complicated very quickly. And also you're copying a lot of variables, which is not good memory wise. So yeah, that's why I've moved on to procedural programming, and I've moved on to languages like this, for example, Haxe, because it doesn't force you to use object-oriented programming. You can actually choose. I suppose it really just depends on the framework and the library that you use. JavaScript and the jQuery culture is riddled with, well, problems. Let's just say that. There's loads of callbacks. I'm not entirely convinced about that culture. I think using so many callbacks makes code difficult to read half the time. I mean, have you seen the nested callbacks in Node.js libraries? It's bloody ridiculous. So as you can see here, I'm trying this animating thing. It doesn't quite work 100% because obviously I was being stupid. I thought that might be a good idea, and then I realised actually that's not going to work because we'll end up in an infinite loop, and it's just not going to work. So I seem to think that this is going to work, but it ain't. So I do it a different way. So as you can see, I click on it and then the web page just completely freezes. It tries to animate and then it just freezes because it's going through that infinite loop, and the animation isn't completing as a result. So I thought it was a good idea, but it's not. Terrible idea. Don't do that. Yeah, even closing down the debugger tools doesn't adjust the layout. That's how bad it is. So no, don't do infinite loops like that. It's not game programming. In fact, that wouldn't work in a games programming scenario either. So I don't even know what I'm talking about. Eventually, what I do is I opt for a page variable, which is basically an enum assigned to certain pages. So inside enum, eventually, when I figure that out and move on to it, we'll have multiple different pages, and we'll be able to use that to determine what page we're on and what page we're going to, in order to determine what we want animated. And we want to have that control because if we are moving from, say, the front page over to the news page, for example, we want to be able to control the fact that we're moving from the front page. So we want to move up, we want to animate our front page elements left and right respectively and fade them out. Once that's done, we want to fade in the news page. Similarly, if we're on the news page and we want to fade back to the front page, then we want to animate the front page. We want to animate out the news page first, and then we want to animate in the front page. So there's lots of different things to think about, right? So as you can see here, I'm checking what the page is and determining what to do in that scenario. And another thing to think about is if we're navigating to the website, we also want to make sure that when, obviously you saw me type in the none variable, because what we want to do is if we go onto the website for the first time, we want to assign page to none. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell the page, okay, no page has been assigned yet. So animate in, just animate in whatever it is we're going to, instead of assuming that we came from a different page on the same website, right? So as you can see here, what I'm going to be using is a callback here. Again, it's not really the thing I'd want to resort to, but unfortunately that's just the culture of JavaScript. It makes you a bad programmer, in my opinion. I think callbacks are a terrible thing. The same with Node.js. In fact, Node.js is even worse. I think just the JavaScript culture in general is bad, mainly because the programming language was designed in 10 days and it was a bad programming language and practically still is. So, yeah. But we've got what we've got, right? I actually read an article at one point which actually described why is JavaScript so bad, and apparently it had to be bad in order for it to be popular, which I thought was quite amusing. I don't think things that are bad have to be necessarily popular. I think quality games can still be very popular. I mean, take Blizzard for example. I mean, sure, World of Warcraft is really old and has very old core mechanics, but the quality of the game has always improved, right? The quality of the mechanics have improved. The quality of the content has improved over time. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every single bad thing has to be popular. Good things can be popular as well. So as you can see here, I'm checking out how I'd like to basically fade in and out each individual page depending on what page we're currently on. Obviously I was checking there in the Haxe API where the function parameter was, and it was actually just located in the Haxe package. So you saw me import that. And then as you can see, I'm assigning page to none and making sure that when we actually load the page for the first time, it actually displays it. And we animate it. That comes in. As you can see, the header just appeared immediately, then it animated, which is not the result that we want. So I do eventually change that in CSS. So I get rid of that animation stuff, and I opt for doing it in jQuery in the end. Obviously, as you saw there, it animated and then it just completely vanished because obviously panel complete is no longer available on that class. So we have to do an animation inside of Haxe. And when we complete that animation, we apply the class. It's the only way we can really do it. It's unfortunate that CSS doesn't have anything native to allow us to do that, but yeah. Again, it is what it is. I eventually figured out what I was going to do, which was to get the panel and animate it accordingly. So adjusting the opacity and the margin. And then again, using a callback function to basically say, okay, I've done it. Now do something else. And in this instance, what I'm doing is I'm adding the class panel complete to make sure that it doesn't just disappear, right? So I go ahead and build that. I refresh the page. And I realize there's something wrong. And eventually I realized that actually I needed to place it under its own individual page in order for it to work properly. In the switch statement, that is. So I refresh it, it does appear, but it doesn't work as expected. I eventually realized that when we're checking the different pages, that there's a problem with how we are handling that. So I cut all of that code and put it into its own function called switch page, right? And that will basically just do what we just cut. So we operate on any animations that we want to do at that point. Here's me correcting my inconsistent coding conventions because I'm inconsistent. So I place the URL as a parameter. I cut and paste to make sure that it all does work. And up here what I do is I say, okay, I know I want to go to this page, let's set the content HTML and then switch page, passing in URL as a result, and then doing the same with the next bit as well, but inside of the callback, right? So we animate everything out if we came from the front page, right? And then we are assigning the inner HTML of the content and animating the next page in. So as you can see, that's now working. I click, I animate to the next page, which is all very, very good indeed. But obviously, as you can see, if we're clicking back and forth between the pages, suddenly there's a problem again. So what I eventually opt to do after that is say, okay, I'm coming from a certain page, right? So as you can see here, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can just continue to use page to see where I'm coming from, but then I realize actually that's probably not going to work. I did try this to see if that does work. I think maybe not. I just go straight to it. Yeah, okay, I go straight to it. I'm not remembering my own video, that's a problem. That's a bit of a problem. Then again, it is a 40 odd minute video, so didn't expect me to remember everything. So here what I'm doing is I'm setting the page depending on where or what page we are. So if we're going to a certain page, then we want to animate the page that we're, depending on where we're going to, rather, sorry. If there's some other page that we don't know about, then we're just going to set it to none. So we build that, and as you can see, it's not quite working 100% because I realise that even though we might be going to a certain page, doesn't necessarily mean that's actually where we came from. I made a mistake there. I called it font, not front. So it animates properly now. It's all good. And I can go back, and it won't animate in, which was a problem. So I do eventually fix that. So it's just a case of copying and pasting that function there and just adjusting it, calling it fade in, then adjusting it to 1, and then getting rid of margin left because we don't need that. We want it to be in the same location as it was. And so we say fade in here. Let me get rid of that callback because we don't need it anymore. Not for fading in, it's only for the fade out. So that'll be it for this update. Only got a couple more minutes left, so I'm going to use this time to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and you'll be able to see our animations and being able to navigate between different pages seamlessly, which is all great. So thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.